My name is Christina Gata with the Public Health Department, and I manage the soda tax revenue that comes to the health department for community-based grants. And could you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Jamie Stark from Farming Hope. We're a culinary job training program here in San Francisco.
You are funded by the soda tax.
Very much so,
And
yeah.
and for this advocacy piece that we're talking about today, I was just hoping that you could tell us a little bit about when you successfully advocated to the Board of Supervisors last year.
Yeah, so during what felt like a peak in the COVID crisis, we had been asked to donate a lot more meals from our community kitchen for shelters and residents who are experiencing food insecurity in an intense way. And so it seemed like a good fit for Addback funding from the Board of Supervisors, something that I had never been a part of requesting before, but some of the nonprofits we worked with for distributing our meals had, especially Compass Family Services, Mission Food Hub. So they helped me sort of put together this mini coalition request for just direct funding from the city budget to get more meals cooked and delivered to folks who needed them most. And so we asked for enough money to pay for at least 33,000 meals, and we ended up getting about half of what we asked for. So we weren't able to meet all of the requests, but it was a big help in doing some of what was on that wait list at the height of the pandemic.
Wow. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what did you do to prepare for that? So you were somewhat successful, which is it's a lot better than nothing. Um, but you mentioned a mini coalition, and I'm curious about that. And then also anything else that you did to prepare.
Yeah, so what I was coached to do was put together a one pager and a budget, what we were going to spend the money on, and directly who was involved, the clients and the nonprofits, what was going to happen, and why it was a necessary service. Sort of like explaining to the city how we were doing their work for them, and how the need was determined, and what's already been going on, and what can happen if this funding comes through. So the preparation process was talking to clients and nonprofits and getting those numbers in order, and then submitting the request to the Board of Supervisors, and then advocating for that particular request. I think in our case, I wouldn't have known how to do it if it wasn't with these other nonprofits we were working with. But it definitely felt like the right thing to do because we had people coming to us for more of this need, and it felt like we were helping the city. It felt like an appropriate ask because we were helping the city sort of fulfill this immediate need. We were already working on doing it and literally just needed funding to do so.
And when you submitted it to the Board of Supervisors, did you just submit it to the full Board of Supervisors? Did you submit it to your district supervisor? How does that work?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, one is, yes, you submit to the whole board, but there's one supervisor. It changes every budget cycle, who's the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. And so last year it was former supervisor Matt Haney. And so you fill out what's essentially a Google form that their office puts out, I think usually in May, a couple months before the budget's decided, to submit that request. And they sort of centralize that or coordinate all of the asks. But you also want to be sure you're talking to your supervisor or more than one supervisor if your work is across districts, or if it's a citywide ask, all of the supervisors. Typically, when you reach out, you're going to be meeting with staffers and not the supervisors themselves. But that can sometimes be more effective because they're oftentimes actually doing the work behind the scenes. Yeah, but even if you don't get those meetings with every single supervisor, it's just crucial to reach out to all of them and explain what's going on. Otherwise, without that advocacy, they might not know the severity or the need of the ask. I think what's tough there is there's a lot of privilege of some of the organizations who have more staff time to do this advocacy are probably more likely to get those requests. So I think over time being more collaborative and working in coalitions is a really good way to sort of spread that workload of doing the advocacy, um, essentially bundling the request where it makes the most sense.
Oh, it's really insightful. That notion about large versus small and how a coalition can support smaller organizations. I mean, I think one key takeaway for me is that May um, is probably the key month to start. And so you probably have to be preparing in advance of May for this add back request in this case.
Yeah, it's hard because, like in our case, we wanted to meet the need for the meals immediately. So in some ways, it felt like it took a long time, but ultimately, it was just a few months before we started getting the Addback funding. Um, so yeah, I would say certainly that the timeline is April. You would start getting everything in order, and May really reach out. June is really busy because that's when the mayor's budget is released. So the supervisors are going through that. So you want to try to meet with them before the mayor's budget is released. And just be in conversation with other groups that are working on this so there's more collaboration and less like competition. And the group I recommend reaching out to the most is Budget Justice Coalition. They seem to um, really have it together on sort of coordinating asks and understanding the landscape and answering questions. And they even have trainings, and they're really into democratizing the budget process so that um, client-centered organizations and CBOs are doing advocacy with and for their clients and sort of participating in that budget process in a way that's more driven by people's needs on the ground as opposed to just a couple politicians deciding it.
That sounds like an incredibly powerful and important ally. Can you talk a little bit about what happened once you learned you did get the funding? Um, well, I guess specifically, I remember you reaching out to me to tell me to pay attention to it, and that mattered in the end.
Yeah, because I didn't quite know the technicalities or what was going to happen. Again, it's good that we had our coalition so that other agencies that had done something similar before could help answer questions. You can also always reach out to your supervisor and ask their staffers more about the process. But all this funding, this Addback sort of grants have to come through a department, is my understanding.
Yes.
And so because we already had essentially what is a contract with DPH, we were able to, or the foundation rather, we were able to work together to add the Addback money through there with some extra paperwork. And I think if you don't have a contract with the city department, it can be really hard to get those Addback dollars to your agency. So like communicating beforehand with the department you already work with or to the department where the spending makes the most sense is really important. And we all know like the city bureaucracy can be really slow. So that's part of that like beginning in April process is figuring out, and they'll even ask you that on the Google form for the official Addback request in May, which department is this funded through? So getting that sort of decided or approved beforehand is super important.
What I would add from my end is that eventually, after the budget was fully approved, there was an email sort of looking for, does anybody know about this funding? And so, from a city perspective, knowing that you had made that request, I was immediately able to say, yes, I know what this is. So I would offer that is an important step. So I think just in closing, I feel like you shared a lot about what you've learned as this was a new process for you. But are there any other lessons that you would want to, lessons or advice that you would offer other grantees?
I think first, like remember, it's our tax money. It's not even. It's as residents. Um, it's our tax money going into this pool, and so together with your clients and your colleagues, you're just advocating for the appropriate and efficient spending of your own money. So obviously not to be pushy or arrogant, but to be confident and clear that this is in an attempt to sort of democratize the spending process, which really is our most important policy as a city, is where we put our money, where we put our priorities, how things happen, how things get funded. That you, yeah, just don't be afraid. I mean, I was felt very nervous having these conversations, and nervous because I wanted it to happen. I wanted to cook these meals and get them out the door, and have, yeah, grow our ability to be there for people, but to just have that sense that, as long as what you're advocating for is right, that you definitely should be advocating for it. And yeah, I would start earlier. I mean, I think we didn't have a lot of meetings with staffers because we were so new. We hadn't even reached out till June, so I always set up those meetings in May before the mayor's budget comes out. Many of the requests don't get fulfilled at all, and a lot of them are only partially fulfilled, like ours was. So unfortunately, if it is an emergency situation like ours, trying to be creative about other sources you could also piece together as a sort of a plan B or C or D. And then obviously trying to be as client centric as possible. So in our case, we interviewed a lot of our clients about their acute needs, clients and potential clients, about like what they would say. We had a few attend supervisor meetings. We had a few who were busy during the day with kids or with work, sort of record really short videos on an iPhone.
Oh,
And we
nice.
played those during public comment and with some of the supervisor meetings, or we email those later. And so I think just reminding people that, it's about real people is probably one of the most important steps.
Great. That's so much that you've offered. And I really appreciate your taking the time to share what you've learned. And I'm hoping that if any of our partners have questions, they can reach out to you for more information and advice.
Yeah, for sure. Email me anytime. It's just Jamie, JAMIE at farminghope.org, or ask Christina how to get a hold of me.
I'll get in touch with him. Well, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate your sharing your knowledge and experience.
Yeah, thanks for all you do, Christina.